Today, we're talking about something that doesn't always get the spotlight in witchy stories. Not herbs or potions, but words. Spoken words. The quiet, often whispered craft of the charm weaver. People who, when a child fell and blood wouldn't stop, or a burn blistered, or sleep wouldn't come, they had a phrase, a rhythm, a way of speaking into the dark that seemed to steady the world again. These weren't elaborate rituals. Often, they were just a few words, repeated softly. But in communities where doctors were far away, those words carried something powerful. They carried hope. They carried the quiet authority of someone who believed deeply that healing was possible, which, as we know, can sometimes be enough to steady a frightened heart.
Welcome, Wanderer.
And thank you for joining us on the path.
This is the Roaming Raven podcast.
A place for old stories, whispered magic, and the folklore that still clings to the hedgerows.
Each week, we'll be guiding you through a tale drawn from witchcraft, folklore, and folk belief.
Stories of cunning folk and wise women, of charms and curses, of herbs that heal and words that bind.
We'll explore the legends themselves,
and then wander deeper into what they meant to the people who told them.
their remedies, their rituals, their fears and hopes, and the strange, beautiful ways they made sense of the world.
These are not just stories of magic. They're stories of survival, of knowledge passed quietly from hand to hand, of power found in plants, in ritual, and in the spoken word.
So make yourself comfortable, light a candle, pour a cup of tea, or walk with us beneath the trees.
This is Folklore for the Witchy, history for the curious, and a path for anyone who feels called by the old ways.
We are your hosts, Paula and Tracy, and this
is the Roaming Raven podcast.
Can you hear the wings beat? Can you hear the sound? Lifting up the heavy hearts from the frozen ground. It's the folklore of the future. It's the history of now. Taking back the scepter and the iron-willed vow. Slower now, the mist rolls in. The bird begins to sing of every hidden, holy, and forgotten thing.
In the northern hills, where the wind moved endlessly across the stone walls and grazing fields, there lived a woman called Elspeth. Her cottage sat where the road bent between two villages, not quite belonging to either. Travellers passed by, farmers, shepherds, pedlars. Some stopped for water, some stopped for rest, and some stopped because they'd heard whispers about the woman who lived there. Elspeth wasn't what people expected. No jars of dried herbs crowding the shelves, no bundles of roots hanging from the rafters. Instead, her cottage was strangely simple. A worn Bible beside the hearth, a bundle of red thread, a wooden box filled with folded scraps of paper. Because her craft wasn't something you could easily see. It lived mostly in memory and in words. The story most people told was about a shepherd boy. His knife slipped while he was mending a fence, cut deep across his palm. His father wrapped the hand in cloth and hurried down the path, but the bleeding wouldn't stop. Someone said, "Take him to Elspeth." The boy sat pale at her table while she unwrapped the cloth. She placed 2 fingers lightly beside the wound, and then she began to speak very softly. "Blood stands still as Christ stood still. When John baptized him in the river, blood stands still and trouble no more. Once, twice, 3 times. By the third, the bleeding had slowed. By the fourth, it had almost stopped. The father stared at the wound as though it had changed its mind. Word travelled quickly after that. People began stopping more often. A farmer with bruised ribs, a young woman with burns from the cooking fire, a mother carrying a child who couldn't stop coughing. Elspeth didn't always use herbs. Sometimes she did. Thyme steeped in water, honey mixed with garlic, but often she began the same way. She sat beside them, she listened, and then she spoke. Sometimes it was a charm whispered over water, sometimes a verse spoken while tying red thread around a wrist. Sometimes she wrote a few careful words on a scrap of paper, folded it 3 times and handed it over. Carry this close to the body. Not everyone trusted her. The village priest warned that charms could lead people away from proper faith. But even he couldn't deny that people sometimes left Elspeth's cottage feeling calmer than when they arrived, and sometimes they left feeling better. The winter that fixed her reputation came years later. Bitter cold, snow burying the fields, and then fever spreading through the villages like slow fire. One evening, a man arrived carrying his daughter. She couldn't have been more than 7. Her skin was hot, her breath quick and shallow. Elspeth placed a bowl of water beside the child's head, lit a candle, and began to speak. The same charm over and over. Between the words, she dipped her fingers into the water and brushed it across the child's forehead. The hours passed. Outside, the wind clawed at the cottage. Inside, the fire burned low. Still, Elspeth spoke. Near dawn, the child's breathing changed. The fever broke. The father left with tears in his eyes. By spring, Elspeth's name had travelled far beyond the hills. People said she could stop bleeding, cool fevers, that her words carried power. Some said the power came from God. Others whispered it came from somewhere older. But everyone agreed, when pain struck suddenly, when fear filled the room, the woman by the roadside had words that seemed to steady the world again.
So, that's the story. But here's what I found fascinating. Elspeth, she's not just folklore, is she? People like her really existed, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. Across British, Ireland, Scandinavia and much of Europe, there were people known specifically for their charms, spoken phrases passed down through generations. Most of the time they were never written down, passed orally from parent to child, from healer to apprentice, and sometimes, according to folklore, only once in a lifetime, when the original charmer believed their own death was approaching.
Ooh.
Wow.
Yeah, they'd want to avoid a surprise death then, wouldn't they? They'd lose all of that wisdom. So why did they do this? Is it because if too many people knew the words, the power might fade?
Yeah, that's right. There was a real belief that secrecy preserved potency.
What I'm really struck by is how charms sit in this kind of strange space between religion and older folk traditions. A lot of surviving charms include Christian imagery like Christ, saints, biblical events, but the structure, the rhythm, the repetition and the sort of poetic phrasing, it feels much older.
It does. Older magical traditions didn't disappear. They kind of adapted. They wove themselves into Christian language and symbolism, and that's how they managed to survive.
Of course. So if we take that bleeding charm from Elspeth's story, blood stands still as Christ stood still when John baptized him in the river, it's almost like a poem, isn't it? It creates this sort of moment of stillness. The words themselves, they describe something stopping, the river, the water, and then they apply that idea to a wound. It's symbolic, but it's also deeply psychological.
And what's important is the repetition. 3 times, sometimes 9 times. 3 is often seen as a number of balance, completion. 9, 3 times 3, appears frequently in Norse and Celtic traditions. So even the number of repetitions carried meaning.
That's true. And another thing is, the charms were often spoken very quietly, almost whispered. Sometimes only the healer and the patient could hear them. That's not just about secrecy, though, is it?
No, it was about creating a moment that felt intimate and focused. When someone is injured or frightened, having someone sit beside them, speak slowly, repeating calming words, that can actually have a huge effect on the body.
Of course it can. It's true today. I mean, modern science backs that up, doesn't it?
It does. When people feel calm and supported, the body releases fewer stress hormones. Pain can feel less intense. Bleeding can actually slow down. The immune system works more effectively. So even if someone today doesn't believe the words themselves hold supernatural power, the ritual of the charm can still have real physical effects.
Mm-hmm. And that's why these traditions have lasted so long, isn't it? They weren't just superstition. They worked, at least enough that people trusted them.
Well, you can't argue with something that you've got visible results for, can you? I mean,
no, absolutely not. And talking of visible results, let's talk about some of the objects.
One of the things I love about charm traditions is how simple the objects were. Thread, water, paper, salt, sometimes a small stone or a piece of iron, ordinary things that existed in every household.
And yet they were treated as if they carried meaning far beyond their everyday use, weren't they? Take thread, for example. We've all got thread in our houses, but a healer might tie red thread around someone's wrist while speaking the charm. Maybe they'd knot it 3 times or maybe 9 times.
It wasn't just about the tying something physically. It symbolised binding the illness, tying the wound closed.
Makes
In
sense.
folklore, thread often represents control over fate. Think of the fates in Greek mythology, spinning and cutting the threads of human lives.
I always find the fates absolutely terrifying. I don't know about you. So, I mean, they really were, weren't they? So when the charmers used the thread in their healing rituals, they were symbolically taking hold of the thread, the thread of the body, and saying, this injury stops here. This illness does not continue.
Yeah, like really having control over it, or
Bossy buggers.
Bossy buggers. Water was another common element. A charmer might whisper a prayer over a bowl of water and then use that water to wash a wound or give it to the patient to drink. The belief was that the words themselves could be carried into the water.
Doesn't that make you think of holy water?
Well,
the power of
it's not that
water.
much different, is it? No.
It really isn't. No, it's water that is blessed. We're essentially blessing water, aren't we? And again, psychologically, super powerful. It transforms ordinary water into something super meaningful.
There was also written charms, charm papers or healing scripts. The words were written on small pieces of paper, folded 3 or 7 times, and carried inside clothing or sewn into a pouch. People carried them for protection against illness, bad luck, even witchcraft. So the thing they had to do was fold it either towards them if they were wanting to draw something in, or fold it away from them if they were trying to keep something out, or
Interesting. Yeah. And it's interesting too that here it says 3, we've got 3 or 7 times that we're folding. Maybe in some future podcast episode we really need to look at numbers and the meaning of numbers.
I think that would be quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of those charm papers, interestingly, they're still around. You can see them in museum collections even today. And they've got a mixture of Christian prayers, mysterious symbols, and phrases that scholars are frankly still struggling to interpret. Even when they're written down, these traditions are still really mysterious, aren't they?
And lastly, there's the most important element of all, breath. Because charms were spoken, the healer's voice, their breath, their rhythm, those were believed to carry the power. In some traditions, the charmer would literally breathe gently over the wound while speaking the words.
Ooh, I hope they cleaned their teeth first. But either way, it's an incredibly intimate act, isn't it? A moment when someone is being cared for directly, personally, and sometimes that alone could make you feel dramatically better.
Yeah, it's like the white coat syndrome, isn't it? That when you visit someone that's in the know, it suddenly makes you feel totally relaxed and safe.
Yeah, you have that faith.
Yeah, you do.
Absolutely.
Stories like Elspeth's aren't just folklore. People very much like her existed all across Britain. One of the most fascinating historical examples is a Scottish woman named Bessie Dunlop.
Oh, goody. Tell me about Bessie.
Well, good old Bessie lived in the 16th century in Ayrshire.
Ayrshire, darling. Ayrshire. I only know that because I lived in Scotland. Ayrshire.
Okay. A rural area of farms, scattered villages. She was a wife, a mother, part of an agricultural community. But people believe she possessed a gift. Mm-hmm. According to records from her later trial, Bessie said her abilities began after a strange encounter. She claimed that while walking near her home, she met a man who introduced himself as Thomas Reed.
This isn't going to be a happy story, is it, Paula?
Well, we already know that there's a trial, so...
Exactly. I think we can guess how this is going to go. And you know, your mother always told you, never speak to strangers on the road. But what is she going to do with this Thomas Reed? Tell me about him.
Well, according to Bessie, he wasn't alive.
Oh, great.
She said he had been a soldier who died at the Battle of Pinkie in 1547. Yet he appeared before her, not exactly a ghost, but something between worlds. He spoke with her, walked beside her, and over time he began to teach her things. What a kind chap.
Yes, very nice of him. What kind of things are we talking about here?
Well, important stuff. Healing knowledge, how to cure illnesses.
Very useful.
How to recover lost goods.
I could do with that.
How to help people whose livestock had fallen sick. He even warned her about dangers before they arrived. This must have been some walk.
Oh, yeah.
Whether Bessie truly believed this or whether these claims were shaped by pressure during interrogation, we can't know. But what's important is how her neighbours described her. They didn't come because they feared her. They came because she helped them.
She helped them. What did people come to her for specifically then?
Well, all sorts of things. Children with mysterious fevers, cattle that had stopped producing milk, lost objects, a coin purse, tools, which in rural communities could be a serious problem. Bessie sometimes helped people locate those missing things.
And like Elspeth, her methods weren't dramatic.
No elaborate rituals. It wouldn't have gone down well on TV today, no excitement, no sparks. Instead, she used spoken words, prayers, simple instructions. Her knowledge sat in that same space between folk healing and spiritual practice.
But all the same, drama or not, the 16th century was hardly a safe place for people like her, was it?
It was pretty much the worst century to be for people like her. Suspicion of witchcraft was growing across Europe. The line between healer and witch was becoming dangerously thin. And eventually, Bessie's reputation attracted the attention of authorities. In 1576, she was arrested and brought to trial.
Yep, here we get to the sad bit of the story. What did they focus on then? Tell me.
Well, her claims about Thomas Reed, to them, this mysterious teacher sounded like a spirit familiar, something witches were believed to use to gain supernatural knowledge. Bessie described Thomas in remarkable detail. Grey clothing, solid, real. He sometimes spoke to her about events before they happened. but she insisted again and again. He helped her heal people, not harm them. She described neighbours who had come to her for help. She explained how she tried to ease suffering.
Poor woman and the thousands like her. That was never enough though, was it?
No. In the climate of fear surrounding witchcraft, the very fact that she possessed knowledge others didn't understand was super suspicious. Her charms, which neighbours once sought out, were now interpreted as signs of dangerous power. Bessie Dunlop was convicted. In 1576 she was executed for witchcraft.
Of course. And her story shows how fragile the position of folk healers was, doesn't it? One year, a valued member of the community, and people were bringing them gifts of eggs and bread and things to say thank you, but then fear arrives. And so if an illness spreads or somebody becomes suspicious, that same knowledge would suddenly become the reason that they're accused.
Yeah, and yet stories like Bessie's remind us of something else, how deeply communities relied on people who understood healing in whatever ways were available, because when illness struck and doctors were far away, those quiet healers were often the only help people had.
So one of the most fascinating things about charm traditions is that many of the actual words that they spoke have survived. So we've got them written down in notebooks, passed through families, recorded by folklorists who travelled through rural communities, for example.
Yeah, and when you read them today, they kind of feel strangely familiar, almost like prayers, almost like poetry.
Exactly. For example, if we look at this traditional charm for stopping bleeding, which was often spoken while a gentle hand was placed over the wound, went something like this. Blood, stand still as Christ stood still. Blood, lie quiet as Jordan lay. Blood, rest where it flows today.
Yeah, the charmer would repeat it 3 times, sometimes making the sign of the cross. Now, from a modern perspective, this might seem symbolic rather than medical, but applying pressure while calmly repeating words could genuinely help slow bleeding while reassuring the injured person.
Exactly. I mean, that's what we would do today, right? You're bleeding, you put pressure on it. We know that physically that works, but of course back then we didn't have the same understanding. And the reassurance matters more than we sometimes realise. When someone's frightened or in pain, the body releases stress hormones, and that can actually make the symptoms worse. So a calm voice, speaking rhythmically, can reduce that stress response quite a lot.
Yeah, I don't think that we give enough credit to that stress-calm balance that we have in our body and the effect of being with someone safe is...
You're probably right.
Yeah. So even if the words themselves weren't magical, the moment they created could absolutely influence the body.
So if we look at another charm, this one recorded in Scottish folklore for burns, went something like this. The healer would lightly blow across the burn while speaking the words, fire in frost, frost in snow, pain depart, and healing grow.
The rhythm is gentle, repetitive. It creates the feeling that something is being drawn away from the body.
And there were also charms for emotional or psychological distress, not physical distress. A charm recorded in parts of Ireland for restless sleep, for example. Quiet now, the wandering mind. Night is soft, and stars are kind. Lay your thoughts in darkness deep, and drift into the arms of sleep.
It's like early day mental health intervention, isn't it? It really is.
I was thinking it's like a lullaby, actually.
Yeah. And maybe that's indeed, like, in some ways, the purpose of lullabies, you know.
Yeah, get them to sleep.
Spoken slowly, that sounds almost like something from modern guided meditation, which shows how old the idea of calming the mind through spoken words really is.
Absolutely. When I can't sleep, I use an app and I listen to something very similar. It is surprisingly effective.
Yeah.
So these words, they were soft, weren't they? They were rarely spoken loudly. They were almost whispered, sometimes so quietly that only the healer could hear them.
I think in part that's to tell the brain, this is important, pay attention. You need to do something with this, you need to listen. I think the secrecy was part of the belief. The quieter the charm, the more powerful it was thought to be. The power lived in the intention behind the words, not in making a display of them.
And what's interesting is that although charm traditions have mostly faded from everyday life, just as we just talked about, the idea behind them hasn't disappeared at all. It's surprisingly similar to so many modern practices.
Yeah, take affirmations, for example. People repeat positive phrases to influence their mindset. I am calm, I am safe, I am capable. These are meant to shift how the brain interprets stress and emotion. It's not so different, is it, from an old healing charm meant to calm fear? No.
Because after all, meditation practices, they use repetitions of words or sounds, and that's what mantras are.
Yeah.
We just repeat these phrases, and repeating them slowly really quiets the mind and helps to regulate your breathing. So that rhythm and repetition, they echo exactly what the charmers were doing hundreds of years ago.
This whole kind of section just makes me think of yoga.
Absolutely.
It doesn't it?
We've got pranayamas, breathing exercises, mudras, mantras.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And even in Shavasana at the end, the idea is to bring your focus back to your breathing and calm the mind.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what about in modern medicine?
Well, in modern medicine, we recognise the importance of spoken reassurance. Doctors and nurses are trained to speak calmly to patients.
Some could do better there, though, couldn't
some
they?
Could definitely do better. Therapists use carefully chosen language to help people process pain or anxiety. Because the human body responds deeply to words, they shape how we interpret what's happening in our bodies.
So when we look back at the charm weavers of the past, it's tempting to see them as superstitious figures, but in fact another way to view them is they were early practitioners of something that we now understand in more scientific terms.
We definitely do. They were working with language, rhythm and a belief to support healing, and sometimes that support could just make such a huge difference.
The charm weavers, they didn't work in grand temples or laboratories. They worked in kitchens, cottages or quiet corners of villages, and their tools were small things like thread, water, paper, breath. And the words were spoken softly in moments when people needed hope. And maybe the real magic of charms was never about supernatural power. Maybe it was about something much simpler. One human being standing next to another, speaking calm into a moment of fear. Next week, we move from spoken magic to something even more familiar, the quiet magic of the home. Long before written recipes or measured ingredients, kitchens were places of transformation. Herbs were chopped not only for flavour, but for healing. Bread was baked with whispered wishes, and pots simmered slowly over the fire while women stirred with intention, protection, and care. In our next episode, we step into the warm glow of the hearth and explore the folklore of the kitchen witch, the keeper of everyday magic hidden inside ordinary meals. That one sounds like it's going to be a delicious episode.
Yum yum, come hungry.
So until then, may your words be kind, your hearth warm, and your path curious.
If you enjoyed this show, please consider giving us a positive review on whatever platform you're listening on. Thank you to Georgia Rolls for our wonderful artwork, and to Psych Witch, who wrote and produced our music. Find more of her lovely sounds on Spotify. This podcast has been produced by Roaming Raven.